What is up, Watch fam? I am Christian, the curator of the Theo and Harris Watch Shop, and today we're going to be doing part 2 of my kind of conversation with Cam from Craft & Tailor. Cam?
Hey, thanks for having me, Christian. I'm excited to get into part number 2.
Pleasure, man. This is like an hour plus of watch content, perfect for the Corona time. Everyone's quarantined, so what else to do but talk about watches? So on the last episode, we talked about Cartier a lot, the crash, the maybe inception story that I don't so much believe. So guys, if you guys haven't watched that already, go ahead and check that out. But let's pick up the conversation here and let's do it again, man.
Let's do it. Yeah, let's dive into it.
Boom, watch fan. I wanted to talk for a second about a topic that I think is really interesting. It's the hype around, obviously, these Genta watches isn't going away, and it's really actually good to see how strong the vintage AP market has become. I remember it wasn't so long ago, and I think I was talking to you about this the other day, that the 14790s were $12,000 or $13,000 watches, and that at the time was low. It's shockingly low in retrospect, and now they're approaching the $20,000 mark, which is really more appropriate. And I'm interested in looking back over the course of these two models, right? Everyone's, the debate is, am I in the A series, the Royal Oak camp, or am I in the 3700, Nautilus camp? And that's a fun conversation to have, and some people like
why not both?
Right. Why not both? Right. But I think that the more the more interesting conversation is. Both of these brands have, reissues of these watches. Of course, the 5711 is further from the 3700 than the 15202 is from the original A series. But both of these brands do have their respective reissues now. But the question I have, and I'd love your thoughts on it, which of the two brands has done a better job actually building a collection around that big watch? Is the Nautilus family a better family, or is the Royal Oak family a better family?
Well, I think the funny thing about it is, just not to add further complexity, but you and I live in the world of complexity and ridiculous details, so why not? But what's interesting is if you think about Audemars Piguet without the Royal Oak, like what would we have, right? Like I love AP, but like prior to that the 5402 and that watch, like what would AP be today? Like I don't even think it would exist, right? Where I think Patek has so many iconic references and so many things, that are outside of the Nautilus. That Patek would be around today without the Nautilus, right? So I think that,
certainly,
thank God AP got the 5402 and Genta designed that watch, because without it, I don't think we would really have Audemars Piguet today.
But Patek would definitely still be around. AP very well might. I mean, I think you're right. They probably wouldn't have survived at all.
Yeah, I mean, think about like the 90s and also moving into the 2000s. It was like AP Royal Oak everything. It's like AP Royal Oak offshore, AP Royal Oak offshore chronograph, AP Royal Oak offshore diver, AP Royal
Caribbean
Oak
colors, special edition for Northern Italy colors,
right?
Yeah.
Which is cool, because I love the Royal Oak, but Patek I think has taken a little bit more of a refinement to the Nautilus, whereas it is a sport watch, but they're not making like a Patek diver with an inner rotating bezel, where AP like really exploited that design and really made it like a major part of their catalog.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, first of all, I think you're 100% right. I've actually never thought about, obviously we all know that the Royal Oak changed the trajectory of the word luxury in vintage watch or in watches. That I've always known that, but I never thought if AP would still exist. And now I'm thinking about it, you're right. AP has definitely exploited the Royal Oak. I think that AP has made more watches that maybe pervert the original design than Patek has, certainly. in fact, Patek's Aquanaut, which was an offshoot of the Nautilus, is a terrific watch, and that's the equivalent of the offshore, and I think, in my opinion, better, more true to the brand, more traditional. But that being said, while AP has made more perverted watches in many ways, I think they've also, in the last few years, blown Patek out of the water with the development of the Royal Oak, whether it's their ultra-thin perpetual, or it's their ceramics, or even the concepts. AP, I mean, in that Royal Oak family, is just unbelievable. Now, that being said, without doing a filibuster here, I also don't like what they've done on the more entry-level end of the Royal Oak. I don't. To me, they've blinged it a little bit in size and proportions, and I don't really love that.
Yeah.
But on the complicated end, I'm just enamored with what they're doing.
You know, John Mayer is a big fan of kind of that, like the AP concept watches, like, you know, tourbillon, ceramic, like, you know, it's funny, being a vintage watch dealer, I love vintage watches, but I think there's a certain segment of the market that is like, well, Cam would never consider like this watch or that, and I'm wearing, you know, a modern watch, hence it is like a historical kind of vintage nouveau kind of inspired piece, right? But I think that pushing the boundaries of watchmaking in that direction is, like you said, really amazing. I mean, it's incredible. Some of the technology that is now being leveraged for something as mechanical and analog as like something that just tells the time, right? And I think that is really cool. And so I know, you know, there's a couple of guys that have really, you know, the Code series of watches from AP, not my favorite. You know, like, I'm like, is that watch going to be iconic in 15 years? I don't know.
I think, you know, I was talking about this just the other day on one of our videos, and, you know, like we're saying, AP has been a one-trick pony for a long time. Now, they've produced other great watches. They're millenary watches. They're great watches, but culturally, you know, as far as cultural global importance, it's a one-trick pony. Right? It's the Royal Oak. Okay, and I'm sure
it's the Royal Oak.
If you looked at their, you know, sales, you know, reports, I'm sure that would be affirmed right there. Right? How many millenaries are they selling, right? But I think in the last year, and now I in totality, I think that the Code 1159 has a lot of work, you know, to be done, right? To me, the dials are not nearly as interesting or complex or beautiful as they should be. That being said, I do really admire the cases, I do. But now with their addition of the remaster, this you know, vintage-inspired chrono, which again I don't love completely. It still is AP demonstrating that they're trying to, you know, have, okay, this is our core, which is the Royal Oak, but we are also going to be doing a more heritage collection, like the equivalent of Patek's 5070, 5170, et cetera, et cetera. And on the other side, we're going to be doing a futuristic, forward-thinking line. So, you know, I don't think that either of the two lines that they've recently introduced are there yet. They're actually not there yet, definitively. But hey, for the first time in a long time, they're trying to have, you know, complexity. The brand is trying to be dynamic. So will it work? Only time will tell, but I am looking forward to seeing how it will play out over the next 5 years.
100%. I think I like brands pushing the boundary. I'm not talking smack on AP trying to navigate outside of like the Royal Oak. I think it's great that they're actually doing that. And in the vintage world, there's a lot of really killer, like early APs, kind of like, you know, just stuff that is maybe tank-like, if I can say that, or stuff that I'm like looking, I'm like, whoa, like this is an incredible case, or this movement is cool, or whatever, right? So AP definitely has that, but I think, you know, as you and I were discussing, I think like it is the Royal Oak. It's like AP is the Royal Oak. The Royal Oak is AP, whereas like with Patek, there's so many other watches, and I think, you know, when you went back to comparing the Nautilus and the Aquanaut, I think that was also kind of a cool thing too, because they're the same but they're not. You know, the dials are different. There's, you know, kind of an inspiration there, but it's not like it's its own thing. You know, you can kind of compare if you really stretch it, but not really. To whereas like if you look at like a Royal Oak Offshore or Royal Oak, you know, chronograph or something, you're like, okay, this is basically this one form factor with a different dial, different movement.
Right. It's like the same thing. Like Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm. Like it's the same, but it's not, you know, like it's not. It's the same, but it's not. I think one of the interesting things that we talked about when we last spoke was the current market situation. situation, right? With this pandemic and everything. And you had a really interesting point. I want you to elaborate. Just so much has happened to this industry in the last 8 years, right? This is a wildly larger, different, more important business now than it ever was. And this is the first speed bump it's hit. So take it from there. I really want to hear about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, and it's interesting because I love talking. I love talking about watches. I have the gift of gab, as I'm sure you're all well too familiar with. But what's interesting is that some of these things, especially on the vintage side, they're never going to be produced again. They embody a specific era and time in which design and form meeting function was at the foremost thought of the manufacturer. Whether it be automotive design or furniture design, you can kind of draw that. It's all kind of from like late 40s into like the 80s, and then the technical revolution took hold and everything was like produced from a consumable kind of format, right? So I think there's that specific era in time that for me personally, I don't think that we're ever going to go through again. And there's these icons that kind of come out of that. And I think that the world is also kind of maybe coming back around on looking at things that are analog, but also I guess seeking those things out that create an experience and or emotion and have like a tangibility to them versus something that is just disposable. So
completely agreed. I completely agree. Just to interrupt for just a second. When I'm sure that you've experienced this not only with your clients, but in how you even yourself justify spending money and saving for a watch and spending money on a watch. Obviously, these things, we're in a very expensive hobby. There's no two ways about it. Even if you're on the quote unquote low end, spending $3,000 on a Tudor, it's still a lot of money, right? It still is.
100%. And well, one thing that I'll say is that whether I'm selling, let's say, a $250,000 Paul Newman or I'm selling a $3,000 Datejust, to me, the elements of that transaction, they're very much the same, even though the price points are wildly different. The guy that is buying a Paul Newman and the guy that is buying a Datejust, to me, it's the same thing. And for sure, we're known as the guys that have like some incredible timepieces, right? That have in some cases incredible, crazy pricing, but also I bought a $3,000 Datejust once, right? I bought an $8,000 sub. Like, I get it, and it's very much important. And the thing that I think we were talking about is the world kind of wanting to have things that provide an experience and provide a feeling and a tangibility. And I think that even though the world is kind of in this element of flux between like this global pandemic and not being able to go outside and all that kind of stuff, I think regardless of what's happening there, these things will continue to be and will remain relevant and desirable and collectible because of those specific elements that they possess.
Completely agree. And my thought came back to me, and it's this idea of justifying, when you're spending amount of money, right? And whether it's $3,000 or $100,000, and it's relative to compared to how much money you have and your budget is. Ultimately, I think that one of the big commonalities is when you're talking about something that is everlasting, people have a much larger stomach for it, right? Whereas, like for example, with clothing, that no matter how nice a sweater is, eventually I'm going to get a moth hole in it and I'm going to be annoyed and have to throw it out. So that's why my stomach for a sweater may only be, it could be $100, $200, whatever it might be. But as opposed to your watches where you say, while I spend $11,000 on a watch without blinking an eye if I truly love it, that's that budget, right? Because I know I will have this forever. I will never not tire of it, but it will never fail to serve me, and it's just a different justification game. And that's why watches, 100%. In so many ways, they're evergreen. Like people are never, in my experience, and I think yours as well, but buyers, people who are really into this stuff, they're not really worried or hesitant about the act of spending a lot of money on a watch. It's more which watch. That's what I see a lot more 100%. Often. Pivoting from vintage watches and going into the world of modern, I'd love to get your thoughts on one, the market in general, and two, this Baselworld, right? I mean, Baselworld, it's 103 years old this year, would have been, and now it looks like it's going to die. I was certain last night when I was talking about this with a friend that, after Rolex and Patek pulled out, that LVMH was going to take a more, a stronger position. I figured that, that LVMH was going to basically end up owning Baselworld. And yet this morning they pulled out as well, right? Because they have their own, watch fair. And I who's left, number one? And it's really dead, like legit dead. People have been calling it dead for like a month, but now it's actually dead.
It was funny talking about Eric. Eric and I had a conversation maybe about a year ago. And, I travel around and I go to a lot of the watch auctions and stuff like that. And, I was like, Eric, should I go to the auctions? And, should I go to Basel? And he's like, I think this might be the last one. And and sure enough, Eric's prediction was right. It was the last one. It's interesting. Yeah. I think for us, Basel's really exciting because you're like, what's Rolex going to put out? What's Omega putting out?
Right.
Well, what's Tudor releasing? Right. So for us and for like the watch media side of things, it's really exciting. And it's kind of like car week or whatever. You have like all these unveilings and it's cool and there's these parties and it's like I'm on my Instagram and like, on my computer like for that week, right? So I'm bummed about that.
Yeah.
But I think and it's kind of a bummer because I know that Baselworld is it's like this historical cool thing, but I think the world has changed from the perspective of, do you need a Baselworld anymore, right? Do you need that? Because the way that social media is working and the way that people are obtaining their information is all digitally. And I think that there's a cost of acquisition relating to information and a product's release that I think is different. The other thing that I think is very interesting is you have these companies like Rolex that say, who knows what Rolex is working on, right? Like, are they going to re-release the Submariner or are they going to do something? Or we could speculate as to what these companies are doing, but these things, there's so much money and so much research and development and all this stuff that is associated around these specific pieces. Now, how are you going to release that? Like, what are you going to do? Are they going to like have their own virtual Baselworld, right, around their own brands? Or it's a very interesting time. What do you think?
Yeah, there's definitely a place for these conventions. There's definitely a place, right? The problem is, and maybe the place is, maybe the function of that event is more just a social event where industry leaders meet each other. Maybe it's not really for new releases anymore. They'll still do new releases, but maybe that's the ROI.
Yeah.
But the most important takeaway, which you just touched upon, is going to be: are these brands smart enough now to say, and it's not just Rolex. Rolex is an animal; they're a monster, so they'll always be okay. But are the brands smart enough to say, okay, Baselworld was the perfect a platform for us to launch our watches for a long, long time. What is the new platform? And of course the answer is social media. Of course the answer is creative partnerships with creators, whether that be on the journalism side like Hodinkee, or whether that be on the creative side like with Theo and Harris, or whatever it might be. That's the future forward. That's the way that these brands will actually continue to launch. So it's not a matter of if they're going to do it. It's a matter of who's going to be smart enough to start doing it. Now, everyone does it a little bit. All of the brands have a budget for that stuff.
For sure.
But I mean, are they really going to put their full resource behind it? Who really believes in it to where they're going to put such a substantial portion of their ad budget behind it? Whoever does that, and that may be an unsuspecting party. That could be Tag Heuer, for God's sake, and they could end up being an important company again.
Yep.
Right? Who knows? I'm very interested to watch that, though.
Me too. And I think the thing that's interesting about it is, if you talk about the monetary footprint, right? So how much money do you think Rolex spent on the booth and the advertising and flying their people there and all the promotional stuff and like millions of dollars, right? It's got to be
millions of dollars.
But to do that in a virtual way, it's got to be much more cost effective, right? Your ROI is going to be. I'm actually kind of looking forward to that. I'm bummed that.
Absolutely.
You know, and the other thing too is like, you know, for me, I was thinking about all the people that surround like Basel, right? Like the hot dog dude, like the hotel industry, like outside of Basel, like what else is out there? Like really nothing. So that's a bummer. Like I get that, but I think that the world is changing. And I think, you know, obviously you and I are, you know, we leverage our social media, our websites, the way of creating content around these things and celebrating them. I think that's something that is not foreign to us, but I think there is a subset of the watch market and the dealer network that if they don't change, like the market is going to move without them. And same thing with Baselworld. Like if you know, it's like
absolutely
you have to be adaptable and kind of change. So I'm kind of bummed out about it for selfish reasons, and also because I think that the world is changing and the economy around Basel and that big convention that it's a bummer for sure.
It sucks. Yeah, I'm sure it sucks for them. I mean, you know, that's just life, I guess. But who wants to think about? I mean, you have to. But the families that are affected by this. I mean, that really does. That really does suck. But as far as the MGM whatever management company, I love to see. Apparently those guys are assholes, and I love to see assholes get kicked in the teeth. It's great. That's such a great. That's the free market, right? Like I love to see. You kind of get what you put out there, and they put a lot of bad stuff out there, and the chickens came home to roost, and that's a great thing.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think the biggest benefactors of this whole shift are going to be the community of watch enthusiasts that are going to consume the content around these releases. They are going to have so much more fun with brands and new releases and different messaging than they've had historically. And that's going to be the best part. The average guy that loves to buy watches but isn't going to fly to Switzerland or never would have done that for Basel, that guy is going to get a much more interactive experience at home, and that's going to be fantastic, and that's what I'm definitely most excited for, period.
Yeah, me too. And I think there are, brands that have started to do that. One of the brands right now that I'm really excited about that is on the modern side is Breitling. I love vintage Breitling, like, Navitimers and Top Times and all that stuff, like incredible historical watches, right? But, like 80s, 90s, 2000 Breitling, like Bentley Breitling, not my jam, you know? But they're kind of coming around a little bit. Like some of the new releases that they've, and talking about Breitling just for a quick second, I think they've kind of, they're doing it right now. They're modifying and kind of creating a modern product that leverages the heritage stuff that is cool and that the market is gravitating towards, and they're doing it in a way that is without like some big like dog and pony show. They're doing it online. They're doing it kind of through their social media, and I think the collector market, even a guy like me that's like a vintage purist, is excited about that stuff. So I think if anybody should be looking at what some of these companies are doing, I think Breitling is doing it, and they're doing it in a way that is cool.
I agree with you.
Yeah,
I agree with you. I think that I think you're absolutely right. Breitling seems to be very open to this. I think that they're doing as far as the models themselves, putting the marketing aside, they're doing a really great job correcting, their course. The one thing that I'll look forward to is, while I'm liking the heritage stuff and it's miles better than the Bentley for Breitling thing, is going to be, okay, right now they're pairing vintage aesthetic with modern technology. Modern technology should be there regardless. Now pair the vintage aesthetic, with modern design. Marry those two things to actually bring the watches into the future. That's what I look forward to seeing in the next 5 years from Breitling. But that's being said, I am being a little bit greedy there. We're in a great place for that company, and I'm really excited to see it. But as far as communication, that is going to be a big differentiator.
Yeah.
And Breitling very well may be that player.
What's interesting about Breitling too is I felt like Breitling was on the block for a minute because like I wasn't seeing anything come out of the brand from a modern perspective that I had any remote interest in. And I think something changed in the past 24 to 36 months with Breitling. I don't know if it's like a new designer but hats off to those guys, because I think
they're the CEO, right? Is the CEO change?
Yeah, that Breitling airplane was like at a nosedive towards the ground, and like somebody was like, wait a minute, like they're pulling back on that stick, and it's cool. Like I'm into that stuff.
I think that because there's been this uptick, this solid market for so long at this point, really, like you said, most people that are in the vintage watch game right now have only ever known good times.
Yeah.
And it's actually good to see that while there's been a global economic crisis, the particularly vintage watch market has been basically rock solid. I mean, I'm sure everyone's sales have been affected to some level, and that's life. But this has been a cakewalk, and frankly, it's been very reassuring to a lot of owners of vintage watches that were kind of waiting for the ball to drop, and the ball kind of dropped, and nothing bad happened.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
Yeah, I would kind of share the same feeling. I think obviously T&H and C&T, right? But Theo and Harris and Craft & Tailored, we're still emerging as brands, right? Like I'm picking up new followers and new customers every day. You are too. We've definitely been in a growth mode for the past 4 years, as I'm sure you have. So it's interesting because we've kind of known just this kind of market, and I think even like you, from a content creation perspective, you're informing people as to why these things are special and why they're cool, and I think I'm also doing the same thing to some extent. But I think what's interesting about the market is I'm receiving more phone calls from my customers going, hey, where's the good deals? Like, what's out there? What should I be buying? And I'm like, I'm trying to do the same thing, and my my top end customers are not like fire sailing out their watches. There is a subset of customers that I think is definitely doing that, right? I think it's more specific to that individual's kind of current economic position based on what they do for a living and who they are, right? If you're in the hospitality or restaurant business, like crap, if you're relying on people to come into your nightclub or your restaurant, then like that faucet was just turned off, right? But I mean, the stock market is rebounding. I'm not a day trader or anything, but like oil took a dive, and I'm thinking to myself, like, holy crap, like. Buy, because like the world is not going to stop using petroleum. Like it may have had a dip, but like I don't think like international shipping and all this stuff is going to stop leveraging petroleum. Like oil is for sure going to rebound. So I think obviously when Corona kind of moved out of Asia and in through Europe and then in through the United States, definitely like there is an adjustment period. But I'll say this for what it's worth, I'm getting more phone calls asking what I have available. Are there any good deals? What should I be buying? Versus, hey, I need to liquidate this. I need to sell it right away. And granted, I think there has been an adjustment across some references, right? An AP 5402 that was an A series in steel that was trading at 85 or 90,000. Okay, that watch is maybe not liquid at 85 or 90,000. But I think there's been an adjustment. But I would say compared to everything else, I think it's very stable. And like I said, I have a good number of a majority of the day is, hey, like what can I buy?
And what you just said about the liquidity of a watch like that, like the A series or other watches as well, that could happen in a normal year, pandemic aside, where you tell the owner of the watch, hey, don't sell, hold on to it. Everything's a little just slow right now for whatever reason. There's going to be a shift where you're going to be able to liquidate where you want to, if that is in fact true, which often is. The market does go cold now and then.
Yeah.
It just does. For example, look how influenced the market is by certain publications and talking about certain things. That right there, which has nothing to do with the economy, that shifts the market on models, 100%.
Yeah.
So the things that I've experienced, or you experienced, it sounds like through Corona, while of course something, but not that atypical. Very, kind of used to this stuff. The bigger threat that I've always thought of is not global economic crisis or whatever it might be. It's more largely models that will go out of fad. There are fads now and then, and people who buy into fads, meaning things that are not particularly interesting or things that are not particularly rare or not particularly valuable or don't have a great history of value, those things, those are more scary buys. And that's not because of the economy. That's just because, you may have, read an article that you really liked, you bought into something, and you may not, maybe you shouldn't have. But that's got nothing to do with the economy.
Yeah, the power of marketing, right? And I think we see that.
Exactly.
Not that I'm an expert on women's fashion. I definitely wear very tight pants, and I get asked about that a lot. I think you see that a lot in women's fashion, where the trend is so fast. It's like quick disposable fashion, and I think that you're right. There is some fad kind of elements, like Panerai, for example, big 44, 46 millimeter Panerais, that was for sure a fad, right? And that's a company that has
and people took a bath. Many people did, and they were never sold as investments. They're not supposed to be commodities, but they commoditized the market, or the market became commoditized. Right or wrong, that's just the reality. And if you bought into that, and that happened many times in many different brands, that's life. You lost.
Yeah.
You lost, and it's nothing to do with the economy. Nothing to do with the economy. Entirely independent.
Yeah. Well, and I'll also say this, maybe to add an extra layer about the watch market. I like how we position this too, because I think everybody's going to be like what's happening with the watch market? Like what is Christian and Cam? What are they going to say about this? What should we be doing? It's not some big conspiracy, but I like that we positioned it at the end. We're like dangling the carrot. They're comparing vintage watches, right? Vintage watches to modern watches, I think is two separate markets. For example, we are seeing an abundance of Pepsi Jubilee ceramic GMTs on the market, Batman Jubilees, Daytonas, right? So, I think we're going to see an equalization there. Obviously, Rolex and all the Swiss companies, to my knowledge, have ceased production just due to the coronavirus, due to safety and health reasons, right? So I think that's obviously going to damper production for the year 100%. But I think this, I'll have a customer that says, will call me and say, hey, Cam, what do you think about investing in a modern Daytona? I'm like, well, you're not really investing in a modern Daytona, because they're going to continue to produce that reference for the next certain number of years, and the variances in them are not going to be like the variances between a GMT or a sub.
I think that one of the biggest variations that we've seen, Mark 1, Mark 2, was the Pepsi GMT with the bezels. That, I think, was that was obvious enough where there's a difference, right? Where people in problem will care, not just three guys, not just three geeks, but I think the people will care about that in general. Now, the problem with that is there isn't really consensus on which one is better.
It's a preference.
It's pretty divided. So, So then that puts it again, kind of undermines the idea of, well, which one is more collectible? Well, honestly, it's two tides pulling the opposite way. Do you see what I mean?
Right. Yeah, and I think that that's ultimately what makes this fun and interesting. Again, if you get into the minutia, as I do, and as I'm sure you do, right, you develop different tastes and different preferences around certain things, which makes this fun and interesting. And I think if you look at the history of Rolex and or some of these brands, these slight little modifications definitely have an impact on the collectability based on that individual's and or the market's preference for certain things. Again, I would say that the modern market is definitely going to take a hit, especially dealers and or guys in general that bought at the top of the market, coronavirus, influx of inventory, right? And I would say that those watches also are watches that are bought more as a commodity. They're more consumable because of just the nature of that piece. It's a brand new whatever. It's the same thing with let's say the modern Porsche or modern exotic car market, right? There's definitely going to be an influx of inventory, and people are not probably going to be buying that modern inventory. So I would say that that's going to damper price and increase availability of something that is exclusive, right? But with vintage watches, it's okay, you want a Cartier Jumbo or Bakelite GMT or Big Crown Sub or a pre-moon tropical Speedmaster. It's like there's such a finite number of those to begin with.
And I think
I would say
we are still in the infancy, I think, of the of the vintage watch market. The popularity is still so small. You're only recently seeing the idea of a vintage watch come into mainstream publications like the New York Times or like GQ or like all these. This is new. So, and that's another kind of realization that people have to wake up to, that people like to remember the good old days when watches were XYZ price, and they think that they're overpriced now because of the relationship between what it was and what it is.
Yeah.
But you can't look at it that way. It's a totally false way of analyzing this. How you have to look at it is, well, how many people were looking then, and how many people will be looking in 5 years? That's really how you figure out, okay, where is this market headed? I feel like, even a lot of the minor fluctuation that we see now will end up being irrelevant in 5 years when you see the amount of buyers, triple, or double or triple or quadruple. We don't even know.
One thing that is interesting is, one of the things that I do is I study auction results, and I've looked at like the historical pricing trends of watches. I'm just interested in that, and obviously there's a business element to that. But if you look at Paul Newman's, for example, in 2008, whereas Paul Newman's are trading now in decline, like. I get people like all the time that are like, man, if I had the opportunity to buy, Paul Newman, 5 years ago, I would have bought 10 of them. And I'm like, right. Really?
Right. Yeah.
Because
because
it's like today, like we're seeing strong auction results, but again, I think that a Paul Newman 5 to 10 years from now, they're obviously going to increase in terms of price, and it's
right.
It's not a science. Just look at where things in 2008 we had basically the crash of 2008, right? You had all those mortgage-backed securities that basically just toppled down, and even then, these things were being realized. The thing that I think is also interesting is like in 2008. A Paul Newman in gold versus a Paul Newman in steel, the pricing delta between the two was, based on my kind of general calculations, was like 15 to 20%, right? And I think...
Wow, that's so interesting.
Really interesting, right? Now watch this. What happens is, through this element of technology and through record keeping and digital access to this information, people started to realize, they're like, oh, wait a minute. Like, a Paul Newman is rare, but a Paul Newman in gold is like uber rare. And the number of available Newmans in gold is like mouse nuts compared to the amount in steel. So what ended up happening is when the market kind of realized that, you didn't see like a flip at like 10, 15%. You saw like a 200% flip, where it was like you have a 6.262 in steel, and then you have a 6.262 in gold. The 6.262 in gold is like $1 million, and the 6.262 in steel is like 235, right? Like,
Isn't that interesting?
Really interesting.
And people would think that those changes would have occurred so long ago, and realistically, that's fairly.
It's new.
It's still 12 years ago, but it's news. I mean, it's still 10 years. It's news. I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
You look at the auctions and you see other mediums, other luxury mediums, and without even comparing them too directly. I'm not saying that watches will be worth as much as art. Obviously, art is many of them single pieces, so it's super rare, or totally unique. But the fact remains that the delta is seemingly too wide. Auctions still, the highest priced watch is often the lowest priced, painting. I think that you're going to see the ceiling for a lot of these watches is way higher than people realize. I think that, spending $5 to $10 million on a watch will, at some point in the next couple of years, 5, 10 years, be a fairly normal occurrence. I don't think that it will be written about as often, because it will be normal.
It'll be normal. Yeah, it's like how many?
It's not that much money it's not that much money to a lot of people. $5 million is not that much money to a lot of people that collect collect things. It's actually, in many instances, one of like the lower priced, things that they could be collecting. If people want to be not mathematical, they don't want to be scientific about this, it seems very daunting and unrealistic. But if you actually look at this stuff, it's fairly obvious that we're still in the infancy. But it's a very exciting time, man. And I'm so glad that we were able to, one, connect even off of the video and off of YouTube, and two, the fact that we can do this, both part one and part two. I had a super fun time. I was gonna say tremendously fun. That's like a real that's a real like a Trumpism. Tremendously fun. I had a real fun time doing this with you. I just love talking about this stuff, man.
Yeah, me too. And the thing that's interesting, my world is very normal, like in terms of chasing this stuff down, and we for sure are very fortunate to do what it is that we do. And I think part of the responsibility that we have is to share this stuff and to talk about it and to educate everybody. Because a lot of what I think you and I do is educating the market, the consumer, the buyer, whether it be with a Paul Newman or whether it be with, a Datejust. So
Datejust, right?
Yeah, totally happy to do this, and honored that we could have a virtual hang, so to speak.
Thank you so much. I absolutely look forward to doing this again soon. Please do your shout out. Tell people where to find you.
Yeah, so you can find us at craftandtailored.com, and our Instagram is @craftandtailored, and I think our YouTube channel is Craft and Tailored as well. So
that would make sense.
Yeah,
I hope it is.
It is.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you loved this video, please go ahead and like it. If you love watches, subscribe to our channel at Theo and Harris, and head on over to the Theo and Harris Watch Shop to pick up your next, for instance, Datejust. Talk soon, guys.